actually done a study of women in Scripture. So I kind of felt like that's maybe an oversight on my part, and so I wanted to do that, and I suspect that a lot of you, some of you, the men in the group particularly, may not have done really much of that either, and so I think maybe it would be a good opportunity for us just to sort of spend some time with some of these women and just kind of see what their stories and their experiences kind of have for us, and how God would use them to shape us, and we may be surprised in some ways that happens, and I hope so. I think often God surprises us, and maybe we'll be surprised by some things that we see and hear as we go through some of these stories. And they are stories, and that's kind of one thing I want to put out there immediately. We have lots of different kinds of scripture, different kinds of literature in the Bible. Maybe you know that, maybe you're not as familiar with it, but there are lots of different kinds of literature. There's poetry, there are laws, there are letters, and there are stories, and we're going to be looking largely at stories. We may look, like today, at a couple of ways that those stories get used later in the Bible and are discussed and the light thrown on them later in the Bible. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at stories. And I think stories kind of teach us in ways maybe that other kinds of literature don't. What are some things you've learned from stories? It doesn't have to be Bible stories. What are some things that go back in your head? What are some things you've learned from stories?
Fact and fiction, both.
Yeah, either one.
Well, you learn something about the people that are part of the story. A good story is going to make you feel something for the characters. If they're good characters, you're going to feel you want to feel good about them, and you get invested in them, and you want to see them have a good outcome or succeed. And then you have the villain of the story, and you want to hiss and boo and but also sometimes then you also learn to see the motivation behind the evil, and so you learn something about that. Where do these bad actions come from? So a good author is going to make you care about the characters and what they're doing.
I was reading something online, a post online about the problem that Marvel movies have now, and the problem that Marvel movies have, I mean, to the extent they have a problem, but the problem that they have is a villain problem, according to this post. And the problem with the villains are, we understand the villains too much. You don't like despise the villains in these movies, most of them. You understand them, or you at least feel like you understand them. You at least kind of feel like you know where they're coming from, and so it's hard to sort of pick the side of the heroes unambiguously, and maybe that's the sign of a good story, actually, and not so much a problem. But it reminded me of what you were saying, the sort of investment we have in characters. I think a lot of times in stories, we learn because we see ourselves, right? We see maybe, our own questions or our own fears or our own struggles sort of played out We see maybe in a particularly heroic protagonist, we see this is who I want to be. You know, this is the person I'd like to be. And maybe in a particularly evil antagonist, we this is the person I don't want to be, and this is, you know, this is what I fear in myself, and this is so we get sort of drawn in because we identify. It's hard to identify with the law, right? You know, thou shalt not kill. Okay, I can understand what that means. But it's hard to like identify with that. That just means I shouldn't kill somebody. Okay. If I'm tempted to do so, then perhaps that knowing that law will help me not. But I don't really identify with a law. But with a story, with these stories that we have, we see ourselves. And I think that's the reason so much of Scripture is story. We're supposed to see ourselves.
Patrick?
Yeah.
I think one thing that stories do that maybe other forms of writing don't is they set up a context. There's always a location, a setting. It gives you more perspective on the story because you know, who is this? Where is this? It gives you the context, at least from the point of view of the storyteller.
Absolutely. You get this context that helps you identify more, that helps you understand more, that helps you get into the head of the people in the story. So if you read the text that I sent earlier yesterday, I guess if you read them, then maybe you will you can kind of think about this and consider this. What is Eve, a hero? Is Eve a villain? What is Eve exactly? How do you, is that too simplistic to ask whether she's a good guy or a bad guy? What are your thoughts as we've read these texts, maybe Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 particularly?
In a way, she comes across as a victim.
Okay. There's a sense in which she's a victim. She's deceived, right? And maybe we can relate to that. I think we've all been deceived at one point or the other. I think we've all, all sort of taken a wrong turn because we didn't have the right information, or we had the right information, but we weren't seeing it in the right way. So maybe we can identify with the fact that she is in some ways a victim of things that are kind of out of her control. What else?
She's a hero and a villain. She's
okay.
both.
She's both. That's fair. That's fair. A lot of people are, right? In most stories, most real stories, you don't have people who are unambiguously good guys and unambiguously bad guys. You have people who maybe at a particular moment are doing good or not, but you don't have this lack of ambiguity sometimes. And so maybe Eve is a pretty good story for our world because there's some of both in her. Maybe there's some hero and there's some villain. Maybe you're used to thinking of Eve as the villain. After all, you lay it all at her feet, right? I mean, she's the one that fell for the serpent's lies and ate the fruit and invited her husband to do so as well. So, I mean, sometimes I think we sort of see Eve as just, she's sort of defined by her worst day. You know what I mean? she's sort of defined by this one bad choice that she made.
Yeah, except, what Eve really is human. She's just incredibly human. Adam is a cipher.
Yeah.
Adam's dull, dumb, unambitious. I don't know what Adam is, right? But think about Eve. It wasn't like she was tempted with the idea of getting a new dress or a piece of jewelry or money. what? She wanted to know things. And she wanted to know what was good and what was evil. I think we should be able to sympathize with that. We all want to know things.
Right.
I just think she's human. She's more human than Adam, who just,
I agree.
well, other than later Adam tries to blame his wife. That's very human too, about stuff. But here she's just, and so we don't know enough about her to characterize her really. We have one incident, right? We don't know anything, but I think when we say, how could he do that? I think we're just ignoring our own day-to-day desire as to what we want to do. Why do you tune into the news? Why do you get an education? Why do you read things? Why do you well, you want to advance yourself, right? You want to know things. It just seems she's human.
Mm-hmm.
Van says she's the protagonist. I think in some ways that's true. In the story of a lot of the story of certainly the fall, but in a lot of the story that she's, if not the protagonist, she is certainly, and as Ron pointed out, I think very correctly, we connect with her more than we connect with Adam. Or at least I do. Maybe I shouldn't speak for everyone.
She's the one, like I say that she's the protagonist because she's the one who makes the choice.
Yes.
She's the one presented with the temptation, presented with the choice, and she's makes it. A good protagonist is an active character who makes the choice, and that's what she does. Whether that's right or wrong is, well, the story plays out to the extent that she made the wrong choice, but she was. It's also a major point that she was deceived, and again, I want to echo that we've all done that. We've all been deceived. We've all made the wrong choice based on wrong information or deceptive information or lies.
She saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom. And she took some and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. It's not like, I mean,
Solomon was rewarded for wanting wisdom.
Solomon was rewarded for wanting wisdom. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a difference.
She was told
Right,
not
right.
to.
There's certainly
That's
a
the
difference in what Solomon was looking for versus perhaps on some level what Eve was looking for. But you're all correct. She was wanting, it was not necessarily unambiguously a bad thing that she was wanting, except that God had said, don't do this. And she didn't. But let's back up.
According to the sequence of things as recorded there, actually God told Adam. So somehow she was told, maybe God told her to, or whatever. She knew. She knew.
She kind of adds to it. I will look at that. She sort of adds to what God says. God said, God's words were something like, you may eat freely of all the trees in the garden. And her summation to the serpent is more like, God says we can eat from all but one. So, when it's, you eat freely from all of them and just leave this one alone. And she's thinking, we can eat from all but one. But on the other hand, she's also saying we can't touch it. God didn't say you can't touch it. You can't touch it. So she's kind of building a fence, right? She's putting a fence around that tree with some rules because maybe already she was sort of drawn to it and she knew I gotta keep away. But let's back up a little bit. So we have in Genesis 1, human beings are created. And how does Genesis 1 describe the creation of human beings? What does God say about these human beings in verse 26?
Let's make man in our own image.
Okay, let us make mankind, human beings in our image, in our likeness. so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. I'm pretty sure, verse 26, it's let us make Adam. The word that's used there is the word that we translate Adam. But it doesn't just mean the male Adam, because in the very next verse, God created Adam in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So maybe we're expecting to see, God create this male person to be his image. And what we have instead is he created them. He created male and female in his own image. And don't miss that, and don't just sort of jump over that. That's the reason he creates them, to be his image and likeness. There's been a whole lot of ink spilled over what it means that human beings have the image of God, or were created in the image and likeness of God. We could probably, all of us could probably give what we think it means, and we could be here all night and probably would be no closer to understanding it exactly. I can say this, very similar language is used about the tabernacle. There's a form, there's a pattern from heaven that functions in the same way on earth. And that probably, as much as anything, captures what God is getting at when he says, I'm making human beings in my image and in my likeness. They represent God in the world. They're God's junior partners in the world. They're at work. And that's really interesting, because there's some creation myths from about the same place in the world, and probably much earlier than what we have in Genesis, that talk about human beings as being made as servants for the gods. So you have all these gods who are very human-like in their activities and their attitudes, and they create human beings to serve them. God doesn't create human beings to be slaves in the sense of menial servants to do the things that he doesn't want to do. He creates human beings to represent him in the world, to be his image and likeness in the world, to represent him in ruling over creation. And don't miss that. That's what we're supposed to do, he says. We're made in God's image and likeness so that we can, in his place, in his stead, as representatives of his, rule over creation. And the first place that is being worked out, right, the sort of lab where it's all being worked out, is in this garden that God has created for them. And so you see Adam naming the animals. Well, that's what you do when you're in charge. You categorize, you name, you put terms to these creatures so that you know what you're dealing with. You can make sense of it. Adam is in charge of them, and so he names them. But so image and likeness probably have to do with the things that make it possible for human beings, when we're doing what we're supposed to do, to rule creation the way God would. So it's moral stuff, it's cognitive stuff, it's ethical stuff, it's spiritual awareness, it's all of these things that equip us perhaps to do this work that God has asked us to do. And the thing to notice is both male and female have this status. Paul will make something in one of his letters of the fact that Adam was created first. You have to go to Paul's letters to get that, because you don't get it here. That Adam's being created first means that he's in some way the boss, and that she is the lieutenant. we'll talk about that word helper in a minute. But what you get as you read this, what you get out of this is that without the diversity of male and female, God is not adequately represented in the world. Does that make sense? I just talked a lot there. does that make sense?
You mentioned the wording, and I certainly don't know anything about Hebrew except what I've read from people who do, but it's interesting that the word itself refers in general to human, Adam. It refers to humans. And then the word switch when, I mean, yes, we keep calling him Adam, but there is a different word used when woman is created, so to speak, when there are genders are identified.
Ish and
So
Ishi.
we don't know if that first person looked like man as we think of man, or if that was person and then something else happened. I'm not sure that's an important point, except that there is a difference in words. And so kind of what you're saying is the important part is what was created was male and female.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean, that's made very clear in the text as we read it. We don't have to go outside the text to see that. It's made very clear that human beings are made in the image and the likeness of God, and they are made consciously male and female, and they do not represent God completely until they are male and female. That doesn't mean everybody's got to get married. It just means that part of the human experience is our genderedness, and that's part of how God intended. That's part of how God intended us, and one or the other does not represent the human race in the way God wants it represented. Does that make sense? I didn't say that.
Yeah, and carrying that on, Patrick, that Eve's sin, Eve's fall, is not in the story attributed to the fact that she has a uterus.
Right.
I mean, she's in the image of God too, in paradise. And apparently that status allows her to take this step, but it's not suggested that Adam might not have done it at some point either. It's only as a consequence of the fall that we start to see the friction between husband and wife. God says, as a result of the fall, women will want to dominate, will want to control their husbands, but the husbands will dominate them. Yeah. Which is a result of the fall. We don't know at all that was the way things were supposed to be before the fall. And certainly Eve was a help. Certainly Eve was a helpmeet, but of course Adam was a helpmeet to Eve too. So
we need to talk about that, and that's kind of where this goes next. Is Genesis 1 sort of gives us this sort of view of the creation of human beings in the image and likeness of God. Genesis 2, it's a little more relational. There's more interplay between the male and female. There's more explanation of that. So if you look at Genesis 2:18, unless somebody had other comments about Genesis 1, we can go back and touch on this all across if we need to.
I do have a comment. When you were talking about male and female, I get the understanding or the notion that was needed for reproduction. And that, like you're saying, Adam, that's just humankind, human beings, but we had to have the separation if we're going to continue as a human race. And so gender steps in. One of the reasons, I believe, I'm sure there are many, but one of the reasons is for this reproduction part. And that's needed if we're going to continue to have the world grow.
And that's a good point. And not just population explosion, but also purpose, right? God wants images and likenesses of himself all through his creation, right? And so how does he do that? Well, he creates a pair and he says, be fruitful and multiply. That's how that works. That's how it goes. That's how God propagates little images and likenesses of himself throughout creation. And with the idea, again, that we will be responsible partners of his in the, I keep saying ruling over creation, maybe the administration of creation or the harnessing of creation and its potential. However God would interact with creation, we're supposed to. And so we're scattered throughout the world as images and icons of God's.
When we have some additional evidence of, that, right? In the question to Jesus about who will this woman be married to in heaven?
Yeah.
Apparently, when we transfer and we are complete in heaven and restored, that issue is no longer there.
So Genesis 2:18. Let's go there and just jump in if you have comments. I'm sort of switching back and forth between my screens, so if you raise your hand and I don't see you, I'm probably on a different screen. But Genesis 2:18 through 4:2, and this is kind of a long text. We'll read through all of it, but feel free to ask questions. Feel free to say whatever you want to say. I'm just gonna sort of talk through some sort of the way it seems to work. So the backdrop of all of this in chapter 2 is, it is not good, what?
Man to be alone.
For a man. That's not good. I wonder which word that is. It's not good for the Adam to be alone. And that's interesting, because what has God said about creation all along? There's a little summaries, right, where he says it's good. It's good.
It was good.
Over and over again. It's good, it's good, it's good. So we get here. Oh, there's something that's not good. There's something that's not going to work. It's not going to function as it ought to function. And that's that the man is alone. And so we have this sort of bit of theater where Adam calls all the animals to himself and he names them all, and that's what they'll be called. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found, right? For Adam, no suitable helper was found. And so the Lord caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. And then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. And she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." And this is where Christy mentioned the new words, Isha and Ish. You hear that they sound very similar, but they're two sides of the same coin. And so in some ways, they're the male and the female that God has created. And she is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. That word suitable, it means something like corresponding to him. Nothing was found that corresponded to Adam. And I think that you probably understand that in all the ways you can understand that, but there was no partner for Adam in this work that he was called to do. And so God gives him this partner, but taken out of him. So what does that mean? He gives, God works, God acts in his grace through his power alone to give Adam this partner.
Well, let me ask you,
Good.
you know, that when it comes to the other animal, it says Adam called all the animals to him and gave them all, but it never mentions that there were male and female animals. And like on the ark, there is supposed to be a pair, but here it never meant. I mean, I'm assuming that when God created the animals, he created male and female so that they could reproduce too.
The same phrase is used in chapter 1 when God creates animals, be fruitful and multiply. I think that assumes then
Okay.
male and female status. So the same word is used, the same phrase is used, be fruitful and multiply. And so this is sort of the way that God makes this all possible, of course. And it's God who does it. And I don't want you to miss that. We need to underline that, I think. Adam needs a partner. God gives him a partner, but God gives him a partner made from him. I read an author who actually said Eve was sourced from Adam. That just made me laugh. I'm not sure I like the language, but I get what he's saying, right? I get the idea. So what do you get from that? What do we take away from that?
Patrick, I read somewhere today that it was saying that Adam is made from dust, and then Eve was made from refined dust.
The better stuff.
Good job, Mom. A point that I've seen made before about specifically the fact that she comes out of his rib is that that's a very equal place for her to come from. She's not coming out of his feet. She's not coming out of his head. It's equal. It's side by side. Yeah. Don't read into it too much, but I think that's an interesting point. And
I don't think that's a bad way of sort of a folksy way of sort of reading that text. And I think there's some truth to that. The idea is she's got to be the same. She corresponds to him, right? She's not a subordinate to him. She's not under his feet. She's not a servant to him. She comes from him. She's the same stuff as him. And Adam gets it. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, right? I mean, he gets it immediately, what this is about. She is the one I was looking for that corresponds to me. And in this, we can partner together to be God's image and likeness in the world.
Patrick, to me, that delay of Adam being first and then Eve coming from him, I think because of that delay, when God provided Eve to Adam, he knew he needed her. He had time to say, I need that. The animals are not enough. And so when she provided to him, I think there was instant recognition of the value of her.
I love that you noticed the delay. I think that's really important. The delay serves in a literary sense, it heightens everything, right? What are we going to do? We know what's going to happen. We understand but it highlights it for us. It just sort of underlines it and puts it in bold letters and neon. That she is the answer to this problem. She is the answer to this lack. There is a lack in creation, right? And God's going to solve it. It's not that God messed something up. It's that he's left this lack in creation, and it reminds us of the equality, the partnership that is supposed to be.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, some people would use this to suggest that Eve is secondary in creation. But I don't think that's what the point of the story is. The point, as you've emphasized, is to emphasize how connected Adam and Eve, man and woman, are. Remember, a rib does not make a person. The scripture has already said that woman is made in the image of God. God did the creating of Eve, not Adam. Eve is not made in the image of Adam. She's made in the image of God. And God just took that rib so that we could to emphasize physically the fact that one connects to the other, that they are fundamentally related to each other.
Yep.
At least that's how I
They
see it.
correspond to one another. She is a suitable helper. By the way, and I didn't say this, and I should have. That word helper in English, that sort of implies, someone's my helper. That means sort of, I'm the boss and they help. They're the assistant. First of all, if you have a really good helper in something, that's not true. They do things you can't do. That just popped into my head, Laura, of course, and then also what popped into my head just now was Josh and all the stuff he does with the Josh. I sometimes say Josh is my helper, but he does stuff that I can't do, and that's an important distinction to make here. And the word in the Bible is often used of God. It's Ezer, Ebenezer, stone of help. That applies to God. Here I raise my Ebenezer, the song we sing. Ezer is the word, and it's often applied to God. God is our helper. God is our help. It doesn't mean he's subordinate to us by any stretch of the imagination. So it's the same word used of Eve. So there's no trace in this story of anything other than equality. They are together as the image and likeness of God. And without both of them, the image and likeness of God falls short. So the text describes them as being naked and not ashamed. So there's no fear. There's no fear of exploitation. There's no sense of vulnerability. There's this innocence. Yes, Colette.
Did you hear me, Pat?
I was calling you for Linda.
Oh, Linda. Yes, Linda. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Linda.
No, I was just going to say that Eve was created to complement Adam and to be a helper to him and to be his wife. And that means Eve was created for a position of honor.
Yeah, certainly, and more than just because of her relationship to Adam, but also because of her position as part of God's intention for humans to be His image and His likeness. Yeah, thank you. They're naked. They're unashamed. They're not afraid of being exploited. They're not vulnerable. They're comfortable in each other's presence. They're not hiding anything. All of that stuff that comes into this very vivid picture of them being naked and unashamed. The word naked is aramim. The word in chapter 3, verse 1, aram, is crafty. And so we go from them being naked and unashamed to the serpent being crafty. And that's when we get to the thing that Eve is known for and the world over, and that often takes over her story. God has told them, she tells the serpent, that they may eat from any tree in the garden except this one. God has said, you may freely eat. It's almost like Eve is sort of focusing on the one restriction, and God wants them to see the whole orchard, the whole picture. And maybe that's the root of the sin that we sometimes fall into, as Eve did. And the reason we fall for deception sometimes is we get dissatisfied. We'd like more. And you can argue what Eve wants is not a bad thing. There's all kinds of fiction, in fact, that sort of says what Eve did was exactly what she should have done. She demanded to know this information that was being kept from her. She demanded to know this secret information that was being sort of hidden. She did what human beings should do. She's compared sometimes to Prometheus, the one that brought fire from the gods, right? And brought it to human beings and suffered because of it. And I get it. I understand why. And we sort of said, you know, that this information, wanting to know this not wanting to have this knowledge, it doesn't sound like a bad thing. The problem, I think, the problem in it is that God has said, I want you to trust me. I want you to obey me. I want you to do what I tell you to do. Human beings are not real good when we try to sort of figure out good and evil on our own, you know what I mean? Sometimes we have to do that. I'm not saying, of course, we never do that. But often what we wind up doing when we get to define good and evil is just what is, in the words of the story here, what is desirable. The fruit was desirable. That's what it came down to, right? It was desirable. It looked good. It was good for food, and it would give them knowledge and wisdom. And she's like, sign me up. How, it can't be bad, right? It's desirable. And that's the deceit. That's the deception. You won't die. You'll be like God. And again, none of us are impervious to this temptation, to want to sort of take the place of God in our lives and set our own agendas and follow our own paths and do what we think right. And again, there's certainly times when the Bible would say you should do what you think is right. But there are times also when we need to follow and we need to obey and we need to submit to what God asks. And that's where I think she makes her mistake here, and where Adam makes a mistake as well. Don't let him off the hook.
One of the things that was pointed out to me once about this that has always stuck out in my mind since it's been pointed out is when she's talking to the serpent in verse 3, she says, "You shall not eat the fruit, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." And when God gives the rule to Adam back in verse 2, that rule's not there. It's you shall not eat it or you will die. Yeah. So somewhere over the course, they've added a rule. And I mean, that's one of the things Jesus gets so frustrated by when he comes to earth is Pharisees creating rules that don't exist and creating new burdens. And so it's always been interesting to me that tendency that we as humans have to take God's laws and push them further and make more of a burden on ourselves that doesn't exist dates all the way back to Adam and Eve.
Yeah. The language changes entirely from what God says to Adam and Eve about what they may do to the way Eve talks about it. And part of it is because the serpent begins the dialogue with, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Now, that's not a neutral question, right? That's not, did God say this? I'm just curious. Did God really say this? Yeah. Are you kidding me? Did he try to pull this over on you? And she said, no, he didn't say that. He said that we can eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but you can't eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, and you can't touch it. And as you say, God didn't say anything about not touching it. So whether she's, for whatever reason, she's put up this little fence. And instead of just trusting God, doing what God says, telling the serpent, no, thank you. God said, I can't eat from it. I'm not going to. She first sort of talks about her little rule she's constructed, and then goes right on through, plows right on through, and does what is desirable, which is what we all do when we don't obey God. We do what seems right, what seems desirable to us.
But again, as far as we know, God didn't tell Eve that. So I don't know. It's a minor point, but
it's an important point that's there, and it's one of those things that when I think about it, like in my human mind, and I think this goes back to kind of what Ron said earlier, is we have all had the exact thought that Eve has had. That thought is actually, I think, natural for us to have it. And Patrick, I think you said, in some ways we captured Eve on her worst day, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know what she was told. We know it was said to Adam, but I know that God, who's the judge, says she should have known enough such that she became the very fall of man and has been penalized eternally through the ages because of this one thing. And in my human mind, I'm like, that's not fair. But I understand that. And it's kind of like, you know, when you read the story of when they're carrying the ark and they stumble and Uzzah reaches up and touches it to save it. Well, I'd be patting him on the back, you know what I mean? And saying that if I was in that situation, I would have probably done the exact same thing. But what did God do? God struck him dead, you know? And so I think there's just that part of it to me is sometimes you just got to back up and say, well, God apparently thought she was guilty.
And maybe it helps if we say that the story behaves in sort of an archetypical way, you know, an archetype. It's not just the story of this one person. This is the story of us. This is the story of human beings. This is what we do. This is how we are.
The fact is, somebody was going to do this.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
presumably God understood that this was going to happen. Now, this proved to be the trigger. And in many respects, this is a more laudable sin than others that could have been out there. You can more easily understand it. It's not like she was wanting to, you know, fornicate or, you know, sin was going to come into the world. I think God understood. I'm not saying that means that it wasn't wrong, but presumably God had a plan, and realized this could happen. And because he allowed for the possibility, and he set the tree in the middle of the garden.
That's the thing that I've read this story all my life, and I've gone, I think I was like 7 or 8 the first time I asked this question. Why did God put the tree there?
Right. You know, why isn't it by the evergreen stream, right, up in heaven by the stream where it is now, right? It's there.
Why did he put the stinking tree there?
But one other thing. Getting back to what you said, it's a story.
Yeah.
And although it's not a parable, I do think we need to be a little wary of dissecting it, you know, every little bit. It's been designed to get a point across, but it doesn't necessarily have to have been written to get every point across.
Right. And that's why eventually you stop asking about the tree, because you know the tree is just there because it has to be and for this thing to work. And what you get is this it's desirable. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna do it.
You know, it's a story about people, but it's also really a story about sin. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because it's very, very human of us to look at sin and kind of look at it like it's a tort and we've got to mitigate it and be like, well, it wasn't that bad and here's why. Because like God does not see sin in different levels of this one's worse and this one's not. It's sin is sin. And I think that's part of the reason why the tree is there in the first place, is because obedience doesn't mean anything unless you have the ability to disobey.
You have the option, right?
God wanted us to have free will, and he wanted us to have that option. And we do fall short, and he loves us and forgives us when we come back to him.
Yeah. By the way, Patrick, I wanted to just clarify, just in case some people don't realize, when I use the term story, I don't mean fiction.
No, I don't.
I just mean it is related as a story. That doesn't mean it's not true, but the form is of a story. And so it has necessarily the trappings of a story, which is designed to tell a true point, but in a story form. Sorry.
And if we are tempted to see, to sort of mitigate what happens here, God doesn't. And that's the other thing to realize here. I mean, there are very significant repercussions from this, right? They lose their place in the garden. Does that mean they lose their place as the image and likeness of God? No, but now things have changed, and so you have this curse. Adam is cursed, the serpent is cursed, and Eve is cursed, and this curse it has these repercussions, and we alluded to it earlier. The increased pain in childbirth. I wonder too, it just dawned on me, conception is also mentioned. And I wonder if, like, maybe infertility is kind of in view there. Maybe, can you think of all the stories of women in scripture who wanted children and couldn't have them? And is infertility part of that? Is it the sort of sexual violence and stuff that we see in our world sometimes? Maybe, I don't know. I don't know that we can know that for sure, but certainly childbirth becomes complicated, right? And having children, doing this thing that God has said to do, be fruitful and multiply, now it becomes difficult. Just as for Adam, what God has said to do to rule over the garden, creation, to care for creation, the things he has to do now are going to be much more difficult and much more challenging. And your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And there are all sorts of ways of sort of coming at this. Sometimes people say, here God put Adam in charge, Eve can't be trusted, so Adam is now in charge. I don't think that's what's going on. I don't see any indication of that. I think it's the complication of this relationship that's supposed to be one of equals, right? It's supposed to be one of male and female, the likeness and image of God and partners. And now that relationship becomes complicated. There's a desire on Eve's part for control. There's on Adam's part, there's going to be domination. There's going to be this antagonism where there ought to be partnership. I think this is all pictured as a consequence of the fall, particularly in biblical society when men were, sort of in most cases, there are exceptions, and we'll look at some of them. But in most cases, men were the patriarchs, right? They were the ones in charge. They were the ones who legally sort of determined everything, and who, women sort of depended upon them in some ways. Frustrating situation, right? In a case where you want there to be equality, you want there to be partnership, and instead there's antagonism. There's this ugliness, this dominance, and I don't think God intended the male dominance any more than he intended any of the other consequences of the fall. One other quick thing. Adam names Eve. Remember, he named all the other creatures. Now he names Eve. And that may reflect this fallen relationship, because now Adam is the one who names her. He names her, though, the mother of all living. That's pretty good. That's not bad, right? He names her the mother of all living. And then you have, in quick succession, not exactly quick succession, but in chapter 4 and chapter 5, you have Eve creates a man. That's what it says. I've created a man. With she either says, with the Lord's help, I've created a man, or like the Lord, I've created a man. In any case, Eve, this act of creation, right? She gives birth to Cain. Reminds me of Paul in 1 Corinthians 11, that, the whole dynamic with female and male, but it's not like one can do without the other. And then later on, they have a third son, and Eve names him Seth. And that's really important, I think. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's something to just really kind of reflect on. That despite the fallenness, despite the brokenness, Eve still has this vital role. Eve still has this vital place in God's creation, and it shouldn't be overlooked. And she should not be relegated to her worst day. And
ultimately, a man didn't have anything to do with bringing Jesus into the world.
Exactly right.
So there you go.
Patrick,
Yes, ma'am.
everything is a first. She's first woman, first one to give birth, first time for murder. Everything.
Good and bad, right? It's all kind of goes back to this.
Yeah. And then one other thing, was that supposed to be a punishment for women? The pains in childbirth?
I think that the text treats it as an explanation, not a punishment for women in general. There are consequences to the fall in this story, but I don't think any of it is to be seen as
A
punishment for women in general or for the human race in general. I don't think that's the way it's portrayed at all in this text.
We watched Dr. Pole and some of those animal births.
Yes.
What did Laura say?
We watched this veterinarian show, and there's also
Yeah, we do too. We watch Dr. Poe.
Okay.
So anyway, thank you so much for all your comments. I think it's great to hear from you. I appreciate all your words. I'll try to talk less next week, but if there's a particular woman that you would really, I'm not going to guarantee I'm going to necessarily pick all the women in the Bible, because we could go a long time with that, which is all right. But if there's one in particular that you're just dying to talk about, please let me know, and I'll be glad to include her in our study. So thanks everybody. Really appreciate all your thoughts, all your words, and good to see you all.
Yeah, Chicago.
Nice,
Good night. Bye, Chattanooga.
Good night.
nice
Couple
to
of places
see
in
you.
Tennessee,
Good night.
East
Take care,
Tennessee
brother.
represented. That's exciting.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, Zion.
Good night, Zion.
Good night.
See you, buddy.
Good night.
You blow
Night.
Good night. Good night, Tammy. Hi,
Good
Jacob.
night.
Hi, Linda.
Good night, Patrick, Laura.
See you
Josh.
guys. Hey, have you got any responses about the group? Not yet.
I haven't sent an email yet. I'm
Oh.
going to send a personal email to each husband and wife, and just kind of get their feedback on like what they kind of want to get from it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Guys, have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
I don't know how to get out of here.
See you, Tammy.
Good night. I'm trying to get out of here.
Good night.
Good
Hi,
night.
Jacob.
Oops.
I'm now.